Welcome to Below the Forest Floor. My name is Nancy, and today I am joined by my husband/co-host Ryan.
Hello.
Today we are going to be talking about haunted forts and battlefields. This topic was suggested to us by a friend of mine, so shout out to you. Now, I grew up in Texas, so haunted forts, battlefields, and missions are something that I heard a lot about. Especially, the Alamo. That's something that everybody literally talks about as the most haunted place ever in Texas. I even have a personal story about that I will be sharing with you all later. It's kind of funny, not so scary, but I think it kind of fits what we're talking about today. But for now, we'll talk about why forts, battlegrounds, and missions are so haunted, then get to the most famously haunted ones in America. So according to some paranormal researchers, hauntings can be caused by a number of different reasons, but the most common reason is traumatic events. What could be more traumatic than war and not being able to leave behind the life that you once knew and all the people that were there waiting for you? Tonight's first fort is going to be Fort Douglas, located in Utah. Fort Douglas is considered one of the oldest forts in America and is haunted by many spirits, including one in particular that goes by the name of Clem.
Clem?
His name is Clem. But that's not his real name. I will get to that later.
I would hope so.
I don't know, maybe. What about the people named Clem out there, Ryan? You've insulted them. Now they're leaving. You see, the fact that Fort Douglas is haunted is surprising to me, as it was initially built in the middle of the Civil War to act as a safe telegraph/post office of sorts. It was not meant to see battle at all in any way. In other words, no actual Civil War battles happened here. So how did it become haunted in the first place? Well, one story involves a man that had issues with authority and a horse. The story begins with First Sergeant John Jackson. John was at Fort Douglas, where he brought in a private's horse he'd been using and tied it to a wagon. It was said that he then told the private whose horse he had borrowed, "Carter, groom your horse until I tell you to stop." Carter agreed, but was annoyed at how he had been spoken to, obviously. He noticed at one point everyone beginning to finish up their work and leave, so he decided to stop as well. Well, First Sergeant John Jackson did not like this. He ordered Carter to keep working, and according to the newspaper that reported this incident, the Salt Lake Herald, Carter growled under his breath, "I'll be damned if I will." Carter went to his bunk, grabbed his gun, and as John Jackson was turning the corner of the office door, Carter shot him in the side. John ended up dying of these wounds, and it is now reported that he can be seen walking the grounds. And after a group of Boy Scouts saw him one day, they nicknamed him Clem, and the name stuck. Up next, we're headed to Wilson's Creek National Battlefield, located in Missouri. There we will find the Bloody Hill Ghosts that still haunt the grounds to this day. The Battle of Wilson's Creek was the first major battle of the Civil War, which started August 10th, 1861, and ended with a multitude of casualties throughout the next 3 years in the Missouri area. The Wilson's Creek battle was also the first Civil War battle where a general lost their life. People who visit the area claim to not only see full-bodied apparitions in Civil War attire, mostly Confederates, strangely enough, even though they say that more Union soldiers lost their lives there, and disembodied voices, but they hear gunfire, footsteps, and cannons as well. People have also claimed to have evidence of strange cold spots in the middle of the fields during warm summer nights.
That's crazy.
Yeah, can you imagine just being in the middle of a warm field and it's super hot out and you just feel this one little spot freezing, absolutely cold. And people have actually taken the machinery out there that kind of catches the temperature, and they've recorded the evidence.
Oh.
This haunting is a bit different than all the other normal ghost sightings, as it is an entire experience. People believe that it is because that particular point in time of the war was so traumatic that it left an emotional imprint on the area. And emotional imprints tend to be the thing that people say when ghosts are stuck in time. That would be like an emotional imprint, because sometimes they believe it's not the actual spirit, that it's just the feeling of what had happened there. Kind of took a snapshot in time, like we were talking about in the last episode.
Yeah.
Before we move on, Ryan, do you have any interesting questions for me?
Okay, so just like last time, I do have a couple of questions that we wanted to get verbalized, I guess. But
Let the verbalization begin.
yeah, exactly. How many of the forts do you think are overhyped as hauntings?
Oh, 100% of them for sure. I mean, honestly, come on. What do you think?
Because every place in America is like, it's the most haunted place in America, and we dealt with that when we lived in Texas too.
Yeah, there are always places that are going to claim to be the most haunted this and the most haunted that, especially if you're someone who believes that they have had an experience there themselves. I'm not saying they're not haunted, and I'm definitely not saying people didn't have these experiences. I myself have had so many, but there have been whole investigations in these places by different teams where some will literally have tons of evidence and others will come up with absolutely nothing, not even a cricket.
Yeah.
For example, the Alamo. People always talk about how disturbingly haunted it is, you know? I'm sure you probably heard stories when you were working at the mall.
Oh yeah, definitely. Everybody talked about that. Even the River Center Mall itself has always been talked about being haunted. I did see some things, but it's still being talked about.
Yeah, and if you have never been to San Antonio or the Alamo, the place that they rebuilt the Alamo is right next to the mall in the middle of downtown. So to get to the mall, you usually pass the Alamo.
And you always hear people talk about how that place is haunted, but that's not the Alamo, so...
Yeah, it's basically like a replica almost. Well, anyways, the point is, people always talk about how that specific area is super duper haunted, and I have never once seen or heard anything at any point in time in my entire life. From school field trips to hanging out there while waiting for the mall to open in the mornings to sitting there late at night waiting for my parents to pick me up from hanging out with friends. I've never seen anything. I've never heard anything except for this one experience that I had. The only experience I had was when my parents took us to our very first movie and we were walking to the parking lot and we were going from the mall past the Alamo to the parking lot that was down the street. It was around 9 to 10 p.m. at night. We were strolling past the Alamo when suddenly I hear my little brother talking to himself, which was not unusual. As if you know my brother, it's not unusual that he talks to himself all the time.
Yeah.
But this time I heard the words Davy Crockett. We all turned to look at him. My dad had no idea what he was what he was talking about or saying because he didn't understand English. But my mom and I looked at him, looked at each other, and I asked, "What did you just say?" And he responded, "I said hi to Davy Crockett. He's standing right next to me." He followed us from the Alamo. He's my new friend.
Whoa.
I almost threw up. I told him, stop saying that because he was creeping me out. And my mom started laughing as she ushered us into the car. I got in the car, but I was still really freaked out when I heard my brother say, especially, "You can sit here next to me," and pointed to the empty spot in between us. Oh boy! I was screaming and crying, and my mom was mad. My dad had no idea what was going on. It was quite a night.
Oh, I bet. That just sounds crazy. Like that would put me at a crazy spot and everything.
And we were kids, so like you can imagine. I don't even know where he heard of Davy Crockett. We were so young. I was so baffled at that.
I still only know of it because of the the street and the school. That's about it.
Yeah, I don't know. It was really weird, and I never forgot that. It was my very first movie, and then apparently a ghost followed us. And it just, that kid, I swear, he's not meaning to, but he gets on my nerves. And he scares the patootie out of me, and now I get to tell everyone about the time I met Davy Crockett.
Davy Crockett's ghost.
Yeah, the ghost. So, any other questions?
Yeah, okay, so how many tourists do you think go specifically to get a tour for these haunted places?
Oh, I would say at the very least, probably a couple hundred a day per weekend. If you look at the amount of people that just go on regular ghost tours in general, it's about an average of 15 to 40 people per group depending on the tour guide. The tours last about 45 minutes depending on the tour and area, and usually these people are there from evening to late at night, but not usually past like 1 p.m. or 1 a.m. Excuse me. And so what I was thinking, because these are forts, they're not like some really popular place like downtown San Antonio. They're usually more educational areas. I would assume there's not a lot of normies dying to go to forts specifically for the ghost. Then again, I do think a majority of the people that go to forts are either history enthusiasts or amateur ghost hunters, or possibly families with kids that were dragged there by their parents for educational vacations.
Yeah, I'm sure that could definitely be one of them. So then with that, the question 3 would be, which state do you think has the most or the best haunted forts that have been picked up by your research?
Well, before I even wrote this, before I even researched this, because you were telling me about your question, right? And I was kind of curious, but right after I guessed Texas would have the most forts in general and the most haunted ones. And when I looked up just forts in general, Texas does have the most forts. And so I would assume they're super duper haunted, or at least are claimed to be all very haunted. Everyone has their personal stories. And honestly, Texas is humongous. Of course it would have the most. It's so big. It takes you 10 hours to get from one part of Texas to another, and you're not even at the border at that point.
Because, how far is San Antonio from the border?
A few hours.
I can't remember if it was 2, 3, or 4.
It's a lot closer than it is to get to the Panhandle.
Yeah.
You can get to the border faster from San Antonio than you can get to the Panhandle from San Antonio.
So at that point, coming in from Oklahoma, it would probably be 14 to 15 hours to get to there?
Yeah, possibly. So you can imagine the amount of forts that are all over Texas and the stories that have come from them. But if you were to ask, like you did, what I think the craziest ones would be, or the best ones, for some reason, I would think Florida. Florida already, as a state in general, is known for the craziest this and that right now. So I can just imagine the hauntings, or at least the stories of these hauntings, would be just as weird and crazy and out there.
Yeah, the only other places that I can really think of are places where the massive battles were actually happening.
Yeah, of course. But if it was the best ones, I actually do think I have the best haunted fort story at the end of this episode, and I'm super excited to read it to you because it was really weird.
All right, well, I can't wait to hear about that then.
All right, so thank you so much for your questions, Ryan. As always, very insightful and super fun to answer.
Of course.
Up next, we are heading back to Texas to talk about Fort Phantom Hill, located in Abilene. When I first heard about Fort Phantom, I was super excited to talk about this place. Fort Phantom was established in the early 1850s, and it is said that by around 1854, it was completely abandoned. Nothing truly crazy or eventful happened during the years that it was under occupation, except for the fire that held no casualties. While leaving the fort during its abandonment, the people who had resided there turned back to see that it was engulfed in flames that had been set by former residents of the garrison that were not fond of the area. Nobody really knows why they did that. They just turned around and noticed those people had set it on fire. Sometime later, the remains were rebuilt and it was under occupation again by 1871. Rumor says that a psychic once claimed that a building, an entire building, transformed in front of her eyes to its original build during a visit, and others say that they've seen indigenous spirits wandering the grounds. Some stories even include a young man that was wrongfully hanged haunting the area, but in all honesty, I couldn't find any substantial information on any deaths there at all, except for a young woman who was murdered there this year. Everything that is said about hauntings here are eyewitness accounts that vary greatly, which is fine. but I always make sure that I can find at least one article or newspaper clipping to have evidence that people even died in the area that is claimed to be haunted. Even one piece of the evidence would have been great, but there was absolutely nothing. And the only information I even got from these eyewitness accounts was from a single website. I could not find any other stories on any websites at all, except for this one. And it was on something called Legends of America. This was the only place, and they still call indigenous people Indians, so I don't even know how legitimate it is.
Yeah, I was just about to say, it's like the name of it, not to bash the website or anything.
No, of course not.
But it just sounds a little bit fishy when it comes to, I guess you could say, facts, but like, or just like in great length talking about some of these things.
Especially if that's the only place I've found any of these stories. I couldn't find them anywhere else at all. I just think it's strange that that's literally the only place I found any information about this fort.
So that actually brings me to a question then. Do you think that there could be anything in a place that didn't actually have any deaths in it? Maybe like a migration of some ghost, or like something that maybe pulled something there?
I'm not sure about the whole migration thing. I've never really heard. Well, kind of, because I guess
fly south for the winter.
Right, it got a little chilly. Yeah. But what I was gonna say, I don't think that ghosts migrating is a thing, and then I realized sometimes people get haunted, like ghosts follow people. But what I think might have happened was, if there were any deaths there, I guess it's like, because that's kind of one of the things I was gonna mention, was like, I'm not saying nobody died there. It's a place where people inhabited the area. People probably died.
Well, then also there was a fire. So if there were any records in that building, they could have been gone as well.
That's fair. That is fair. And it's just, I was confused because it was just this one place that mentioned it. But that's something I definitely didn't think about. And
that's why I'm here.
Yeah, to help me think of things I didn't. But in all honesty, you're right. There could be so much that happened here. And like I said, just because I only found one place that talks about it doesn't mean nothing happened. There was people who lived there. Who knows what could have happened?
And the other thing that I was thinking about too was like, like occult things maybe, is like something like that could have been.
Oh, you mean like the people who go to haunted locations that are kind of abandoned and they do things they're not supposed to, like Ouija boards and stuff like that?
Yeah, and that could also make people see things as well.
That's fair. The name didn't even come from it being haunted. It's actually based off of the fact that at one point, when you walk up to the fort, you can no longer see it due to an optical illusion with the hills that surround it that kind of hide it. That's why it's called Phantom Hill.
So I wonder if that maybe caused some of the ghost stories of it just because of the name then.
Like, you think people maybe they assumed that it had ghosts, so like their minds kind of played tricks on them?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly it. Because that's what happens a lot, is if you go into something with a preconceived notion about it, sometimes you look for those things too.
That's fair. Like, that's definitely something that happens everywhere. That's why I hate when people are like, this is the most haunted place in America, and people are already looking for something, and it could be anything. It could be like a creak in the floor or the leak of a pipe or something, and people are like, that was a ghost, even when it's right in front of their faces.
Yeah, that's one of the things about, just that kind of stuff in general when it comes to tourism and stuff, is that the skeptics you kind of want to go into it with a little bit of a skeptical mind, just because then maybe you can like put some logic to some of the things, and then whatever you can't explain, then it's something that you could talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So thankfully I do believe in people's personal views. If they say they've seen something, I'm not going to tear it down, because I've seen things. Or at least I tell people that I've seen things, and I wouldn't want people to tear me down. I'm just saying, like,
exactly.
I'm just thinking, like, a place that you can't find any evidence anywhere except for one website is a little fishy to me. That's it about this particular thing. But If you're someone who has like been here before and you have seen something, please let us know. We would love to hear someone's actual eyewitness account other than just this one website.
Yeah, that would actually be a great way to, add a little bit more conversation into this.
And also, those of you who don't really care that all this information just came from one random website, there is another little story of this place. So apparently there's a lake next to this fort in this area, and apparently in the middle of the night you can see a 150-year-old ghost holding a lantern floating over the lake. Last but not least, we have Fort Mifflin, located on the Delaware. Seemingly the most haunted fort in the US, Fort Mifflin has been a Revolutionary War battlefield, a fort, and a prison, and is now a huge tourist attraction. And when I say it's a huge tourist attraction, I mean they even allow people to do paranormal investigations. $600 for 6 hours, so $100 an hour to do an investigation there. Plus $60 extra per person who has groups above 11. So you could just imagine how much that would cost for like a group that's larger than that. And if you want to stay overnight, it is possible, but it's going to cost you $900 for the group of 11. And if you have more than that, each extra person is $90 instead of the original $60 because it's overnight. Which, if you are somebody who has a YouTube channel or something about paranormal investigations, you're probably going to make a lot more than you just spent doing that. So it's not too bad of a deal, but it's a pretty hefty price if you're someone who's absolutely new to this. Some people say it's worth it though, especially due to the stories that we are going to hear about tonight. Some of the ghosts at Fort Mifflin include, but are not limited to, a woman who screams with such volume and intensity that people in the area believed someone was actually in danger. There are reports that Philly police have even been called because of this and found absolutely nothing in the area that could have caused such a terrible shriek. So if you've heard stories of the police being called for a screaming woman in different like TV shows and stuff like that, like Ghost Hunters and stuff, this is what they're talking about. This is the place that they're talking about, and this is the place that they visited. Because people who just walk by have even said that they've heard this woman screaming randomly in the middle of the night. Then there's the Faceless Man. There was a news clipping found that describes a man who goes by the name of Bill Howe that murdered an enrolling officer in 1863. Bill was hanged for this and other heinous acts like deserting the army, and now people believe he is the faceless man that roams the area. They actually killed him because they wanted to make an example of him, and that's what they had been telling people that they were going to do. People claim that his spirit is extremely dangerous, as he is known to be he was known to be an outlaw when he was alive due to what he did, and he had apparently done so much more. But some people don't think he's dangerous, he's just very sad. The reason he's faceless is because of when during his execution they put a bag over his head before the rope was pulled and his neck snapped. So people, when that happens, you kind of make a very not child-friendly safe face.
Yeah.
When you're hanged. So that's why he is the Faceless Man. Another famous spirit includes the Lamplighter. The Lamplighter is seen in great detail by visitors as opposed to people just seeing a glimpse of a possible something. He is said to be carrying a long pole that was used at the time to reach the hanging oil lamps to light them, and at the end of the pole you will see a flickering light when you see him walk. During his life with the living, it was said that he would light every lamp in the area every evening up until the siege of 1777. Some people say that's where he lost his life. Some people just believe that he passed away at some other point, but that's what caused him to stop and possibly caused one of those emotional ripples in time. If you would personally like to try to see him if you ever visit, he can be sighted at the barracks on the second floor somewhere. Nobody knows where he is because he actually walks around the area. So if you're interested, or if you've seen him, please let us know. That would be amazing. There are many accounts of people capturing photos, videos, and audio evidence here, and it's even gotten to the point where people have left in the middle of investigations because the activity was so high they were afraid to continue. I believe I even saw somewhere that they talked about people seeing figures in doorways in some of the areas. I'm not too sure about that because it's just eyewitness accounts, like most of these are, but that's what they believe to have seen. I mean, I would be too freaked out to continue as well if I saw a ghostly tour guide dressed in revolutionary garb, as many claim to see. I don't know how they figured out she was a tour guide, or I don't know if it's a male or female, but I don't know how they figured out that they were a tour guide dressed in revolutionary garb, because I would probably just think it's the person from the revolutionary time. But people say it is a tour guide dressed in revolutionary garb. I'm not sure how they found that out. They didn't go into too much detail about that, but apparently that's something else you can come across there. And I can imagine seeing that in real life. Like, maybe she's giving tours. Maybe that's why they figured it out. I don't know. So on top of all this, people have also, I know it's just so much, but people have also reported seeing children running around in the air, ghost children, and ghost pets like dogs running with them. Just existing. It's as if the people who resided in the area in the past are still living their lives as if nothing ever happened. And that's why the ghosts of these forts are welcome here with us below the forest floor. I just love the fact that they even included ghost dogs in this.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's what I was wondering about. Was like, there's a lot of things where people have talked about how when there's hauntings and stuff like that, sometimes it really seems like they are just kind of doing their own thing, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's either possibly the actual ghost stuck in a time loop, or it's that emotional imprint that is created, that almost like an extra dimension where it won't ever stop.
It's the, what was that theory? I can't remember if it was like stone tape theory or steel tape. I think it's stone tape theory, where it's like the energy gets impressed upon buildings and structures that it acts like a tape recorder.
I've never heard of that theory, actually.
Well, that might actually be an episode that we could do very soon, because since you are doing this sort of podcast, that's going to be something you're going to have to look into then.
Yeah, definitely. 'Cause next week, not next week, but 2 weeks from now, we do have an episode already set up, but after that one, that could be the next one that we talk about. I think that would be a really good episode.
We could look that up and see. I would like to show you it, so.
Sure, we can start research tonight, because I do think it's interesting that when it comes to like the haunted forts and stuff like that, I've noticed a lot of it might seem like emotional imprinting because of all the traumatic events. Like wars, battlegrounds, and all these sorts of things are going to result in such trauma in the area that people might just not know they passed and are still there, or it will never stop replaying. It's actually really interesting, but I am glad that I got to learn about these. I didn't expect to find out about Fort Mifflin. It definitely sounds like it is the most haunted fort in America.
Whenever I hear you say that, I just keep thinking of the company from The Office.
Oh, Dunder Mifflin.
Yeah, every time.
I know, that's what I was thinking too when I was doing that. It was kind of hard to separate that, but I kind of want to go. Is it weird that I kind of want to go? Because it's like they do charge a lot for those investigations. Like, I saw some investigations that were only like $145 to like spend the night, or $90 even. And then I saw the price for this and I was like, wow, they're either really good or they're like just hyping it up. But the amount of stories that I found from this place was a lot. I think I even saw that the ghost hunters had like a bunch of experiences there.
Oh, probably. I can't remember exactly for that one per se, but I do know of some other places that it takes, like, you can be on a waiting list for like almost a year for a lot of these.
Are you serious?
Graveyard Tales was actually talking about, because they wanted to go to one time, and they were talking about how there was like a 6 to 7 month long waiting list.
Bro, I would forget I was on the waiting list.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, it's ridiculous. Like, I get it. I kind of think this is going to sound so silly because I'm such a scaredy cat and all listeners know this by now. But I think that at some point it would be a really fun episode for us to go somewhere and do the podcast there, and maybe even video record us doing the podcast, or like rent it out for a paranormal investigation, but we're doing the podcast there talking about the area.
Oh, that would be asking for trouble probably, but yeah, I understand. But doing some kind of investigation on our own and then doing the podcast, or doing it along with, like, kind of like we bring you guys along with us through this, you know.
Yeah.
We have the lapel mics and everything that we can do that as we go through an entire night and just kind of like edit up our experience for it, maybe.
Yeah, that I don't know, they both sound like really good ideas, because I don't know, I know this is so bad because I'm like such a responsible ghost person. Like, I know all the do and do not do's, you know, and I'm still over here like, what if we sat there and just talked about them right where they are? It sounds so horrible, but I would love to do that, like maybe at one of these forts or something, because, well, especially, okay, so in Illinois, especially in the area that we live in right now, this is a very small town, and I know they have like haunted forts or some places like that around here, especially because don't they call this like Lincoln Land or something?
Yeah, it's well, just because of, I don't want to say exactly because then it just kind of gives away where we're at.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's, you know, Illinois is considered the land of Lincoln and whatnot. So the southern half of Illinois definitely does have a bunch of stuff like that.
And because like some of the areas that surround us are kind of small-ish, I could just imagine like it wouldn't cost too much to just try to rent it out for a paranormal investigation for the night, and then we could just sit there and do the podcast talking about the people from there. I don't know. It sounds like it's such a terrible idea, but I'm excited. Oh, this podcast has made me way too brave. I don't know what's wrong with me.
It's either that or it's been Phasmo.
I think it's Phasmo. If you guys don't know what that is, Phasmo is a horror game where you try to investigate haunted places.
Funny enough, now I think it might be okay for us to, we can plug something else this time. So, just because that got brought up then.
Yeah.
We do have a YouTube channel, which is Estraloon and Metriel.
And a Twitch that is Estraloon and Metriel.
We'll see about getting links to those if anybody actually wants to try to watch us on there as well. Speaking of Phasmo, we do have some videos of Phasmo on the channel.
Yep. And basically, we go to these places in the game and we investigate hauntings, and actual ghosts in the game pop up and they hunt you down, and you have to figure out what the ghost is, and you get a crucifix and salt, and it's all the things you would see in ghost hunting shows, and you get to see me scream like a big baby. And Ryan going in there just getting himself killed because he wants to be the craziest one.
And a lot of times recently we haven't really recorded those ones, but a lot of times I'm just going in to finish all of the objectives that we have.
But you don't need to finish objectives. That's why he's the only one going in by himself. Like, once we find out what the ghost is, we can leave. But Ryan's like, I want to finish the objective.
Because I still want to have a challenge. I still want to have fun with it. So that's the only way for me to do it.
Which is fine. But maybe for a future episode, we can do like a part 2 of the haunted forts by going to one and doing the podcast or an investigation and then sharing it with you guys.
We could always try and come back to some of these older episodes for things like that, yeah.
Have you ever heard of haunted forts, Ryan? Like, I'm just curious about that, now that you've heard all the stories I heard of.
Other than just like the usual stories of like, something being haunted from the Civil War or anything like that, a place where there was a lot of people that were killed. That was pretty much it.
Yeah, like I didn't even remember any forts by name when this was suggested to us. I was just sitting there like, I haven't remembered or heard of a fort name since I was in high school doing, research and stuff and homework. But when the haunted forts thing came up, I was like, well, here's my chance to get a little bit of history in the podcast episode. Oh my god, the cat just ran over the keyboard and paused while we were recording.
Yeah, I was trying to grab her, but oh well.
But yeah, so that's basically like this episode was suggested to us. I would have never come up with it myself, because when I hear about like Civil War areas being haunted, I was like, oh great, that's most of the US. So that's just so much. And there are more haunted forts. I just didn't come up with, I wanted to come up with one that sounded super duper scary. I wanted to bring up one that was supposedly scary but literally had nothing, so I can kind of talk about the reasonings why I don't bring up some haunted places, because I don't see the point of talking about a haunted place that may not even exist because one person said that they heard a bunch of stories about this place, and it's like, but why doesn't anyone else have any of those crazy stories you say you heard? Where did you hear them from?
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like just talking about something. It's just you're bringing more conversation into it, but you're bringing more questions that don't have answers, because you're basically just regurgitating the same questions that everybody else has that none of them have been answered before. So
yeah, so which of these do you actually believe? Because I feel like I personally believe the last one the most. To me, that one sounded the most real due to the the evidence and the information. This one and the one with Clem, or John Jackson, because I actually found a newspaper article from that time when it happened, and I was reading through the whole thing, and there was so much more that happened that day with all the fighting and all that stuff. And it was so interesting because it was the actual picture of the article on Ancestry, and you could see the old drawings and stuff that they did for the article depicting what had happened.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I that's one of the reasons I love doing this. And if you guys have any more suggestions on like also educational haunted places that I could talk about, because I love learning about history and doing this was really fun, I would love to do some more.
Yeah, that's definitely something to look into a little bit more also, because you like diving into history and stuff. So definitely more ideas and suggestions that could help you just kind of like dive into something that you love so much.
Yeah. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening to tonight's episode. We had a great time hanging out with you all. If you're interested in having a full download of Below the Forest Floor episodes with no ads and behind the scenes content like access to our script, we don't script everything that we say, but I do like to have a very good amount researched so that I know that the topics I'm talking about are actually real. They're well researched. The information that I'm using is correct. I use multiple sources, and I can share all that with you guys on our Patreon. And if you are a Patreon, you are considered technically a forest deity on our Patreon due to your contribution. Also, don't forget to check us out on TikTok. We do have a TikTok, and this is going to sound so silly, but I do skits on there that kind of had to do with the episodes and the way they come about, or how I do little skits on conversations I've had that led up to these episodes. And I also plan on telling some more spooky stories on that TikTok with more information. We hope you have a great night, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.